biggest lie about surviving World War III. Everything you've been told about surviving World War III is a lie, and that lie might get you killed. See, there's this one piece of advice that every prepper, every government pamphlet, every survival expert keeps repeating like it's gospel truth, and nobody questions it. But I did, and what I found shook me to my core, because this one lie has been spreading for decades, and millions of people believe it. Stick with me on this one, because by the end of this video, you're going to see the world completely differently. So here's where this all started for me. I was scrolling through some old Cold War documents, declassified stuff from the 1960s and 70s, and I stumbled across something that stopped me cold. It was a government report, buried in the footnotes, almost like they didn't want anyone to find it. And this report basically admitted that the official survival guidelines given to the American public were designed not to save the most lives. They were designed to prevent panic. Let that sink in for a second. The people in charge knew the advice they were giving wasn't optimal, but they gave it anyway, because they were more worried about social order than they were about you and your family making it through alive. That's when I started pulling on this thread, and the deeper I went, the more disturbing it got, because that same mentality never went away, it just evolved. And today, in an era where World War III isn't some abstract fear anymore, but a genuine possibility being discussed in Pentagon briefings and NATO meetings, that same flawed logic is still being pushed on regular people, on you, on me, on everyone we know. So what is this lie exactly? What's this piece of survival advice that sounds so reasonable on the surface, but could actually be your death sentence? It's this. The lie is that your best chance of surviving a nuclear conflict is to shelter in place and wait for help. That's it. That's the big one. Just stay where you are. Find a basement. Cover yourself. Wait for the government to come rescue you. That's what they tell you. And on the surface, it sounds logical. It sounds like the safe, reasonable thing to do. But it's built on assumptions that completely fall apart when you look at the reality of modern warfare and modern society. Let me break this down for you, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. First, let's talk about the assumption that help is coming. That's the core premise, right? Shelter in place. Wait for rescue. The government will send teams. Pharma will mobilize. The National Guard will distribute supplies. Everything will be organized and systematic. Just hold tight. But here's the problem. In any large-scale nuclear exchange, the government's own continuity of operations plans prioritize one thing above all else: the survival of government itself. Not you, not me. The institutions, the chain of command, the people at the top. Every major nuclear power has bunkers buried deep underground for political leadership and military command. Those bunkers have enough supplies to last for months, years in some cases. But the local emergency services you're counting on, the first responders in your city, most of them have no such protection. And even if they survive the initial exchange, the infrastructure they rely on won't. Think about it. How do ambulances get to you? Roads. How do hospitals treat you? Electricity, running water, medical supply chains. How does pharma coordinate anything? Communications networks, satellites, computer systems. All of these things are incredibly vulnerable in a nuclear scenario. And not just from the blast itself. We're talking about electromagnetic pulses. We're talking about fallout contaminating massive areas. We're talking about fires that could burn for weeks. We're talking about a complete breakdown of every system you depend on for daily life. And you're supposed to sit in your basement and wait for someone to come help you. The math doesn't work. The logistics don't work. And deep down, I think you know that. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because you might be thinking, okay, but what's the alternative? Running around in a panic doesn't seem smart either. And you're right, panic is never the answer. But that's exactly what this lie exploits. It frames your only two options as either following the official guidelines or descending into chaos. But there's a third option that nobody talks about, and that third option is active, informed self-reliance. Not blind obedience, not helpless panic, but strategic, intelligent action based on actually understanding what a World War III scenario would look like. Let me paint you a picture, and I want you to really sit with this. But discomfort is the price of preparation. Imagine it's a Tuesday morning. You're at work. Maybe you're at home. Whatever, your phone buzzes. News alert. Missiles have been launched, multiple countries involved. This isn't a drill. This isn't a false alarm like that one in Hawaii a few years back. This is real. What do? If you follow the standard advice, you find the nearest shelter, a basement, an interior room. You get low, you cover up, you wait. And for the first few hours, that might actually be the right call. If you're anywhere near a blast zone, getting behind as much concrete and earth as possible is genuinely your best immediate move. I'm not disputing that. The physics of radiation shielding is real, but here's the part they don't tell you. After those first few hours, everything changes. The initial danger of the blast and the immediate radiation spike starts to fade. But new dangers emerge, and this is where the shelter-in-place advice starts to fall apart completely. See, the people who designed these guidelines were operating under assumptions from a different era. They assumed the conflict would be relatively contained, maybe a few cities hit, maybe limited exchanges. They assumed infrastructure would largely survive outside the blast zones. They assumed government response capabilities would remain functional. And most importantly, they assumed the conflict would have a clear beginning and end. A terrible day or two, followed by recovery. But modern warfare doesn't work like that, and neither does modern society. Let me give you a real scenario that military planners actually worry about. A coordinated first strike doesn't just target cities, it targets infrastructure, power grids, water treatment facilities, oil refineries, food distribution centers, communication hubs, military installations obviously, but also the hidden infrastructure that keeps modern civilization functioning. The stuff you never think about until it's gone. In this scenario, the bombs themselves might only kill a few million people directly. That's horrifying to even say, but it's true. The real death toll comes after, because when the power goes out and doesn't come back on, when the water stops flowing, when the grocery stores run empty, and there's no resupply coming, that's when the real catastrophe begins. Studies have estimated that in a prolonged grid-down scenario, up to 90% of the American population could die within the first year. Not from radiation, not from the blasts, from starvation, dehydration, disease, violence, and lack of medication. 90%. That's not some fringe conspiracy theory. That's the assessment of people who study this for a living. And if you're just sitting in your basement, waiting for help that isn't coming, you're going to be part of that statistic. Now here's a mini cliffhanger for you, because I haven't even gotten to the most disturbing part yet. The part that completely changed how I think about this. But first, I need you to understand something about human psychology and how governments use it. There's a concept in disaster management called managed expectation. It's a polite way of describing something pretty dark. Basically, when authorities know they can't actually save everyone, they focus on maintaining order instead. The priority shifts from maximizing survival to minimizing chaos. Because chaos is unpredictable. Chaos is dangerous for the people in charge. Order, even if it results in more deaths, is preferable from a control standpoint. So the advice given to the public isn't optimized for your survival. It's optimized for compliance, for keeping you calm, for keeping you in one place where you're predictable and manageable. Think about that for a second. The very people you're trusting to tell you how to survive have a different set of priorities than you do. Their job isn't to keep you alive. Their job is to maintain social cohesion. And sometimes those two things align, but often they don't. And in a World War III scenario, they definitely don't. So what's the alternative? What should you actually do? Well, this is where I have to be careful, because I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. Anyone who tells you they have a foolproof plan for surviving nuclear war is selling you something. But what I can tell you is that the people who will have the best chances share certain characteristics, and almost none of those characteristics involve sitting still and waiting. First characteristic: they understand timelines. This is crucial. The danger profile of a nuclear event changes dramatically over time. The first few minutes are about blast survival, pure physics, distance and shielding. The first few hours are about initial radiation exposure. This is where sheltering genuinely helps. But after roughly 48 to 72 hours, for most areas away from direct ground zero, the acute radiation danger drops significantly. That's when the calculus changes. That's when movement becomes not just possible but potentially essential. Second characteristic, they have options. This is the big one. The people who survive large-scale disasters are rarely the ones with the best stuff. They're the ones with the best adaptability. Multiple locations they can go, skills they can use, relationships they can rely on. You know what kills most people in prolonged emergencies? Dependency on single points of failure. One location, one source of food, one source of water, one plan. The survivors are the ones who have backup plans for their backup plans. Third characteristic, they understand the social dynamics of collapse. This is something almost nobody talks about, and it's where this gets really dark. I need you to pay close attention here, because this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say in this entire video. In the first few days of a major crisis, people generally help each other. There's a phenomenon called disaster solidarity. It's beautiful, actually. Strangers coming together, sharing resources, cooperating. But that window doesn't last forever. Studies of historical disasters show that after roughly 2 weeks of sustained crisis without relief, social bonds start to fracture. After a month, you're looking at a fundamentally different social landscape. Desperation changes people. Hunger changes people. Fear for their families changes people. Good people do terrible things when they're starving, and they see that you have food while their children don't. So if your plan is to shelter in place with your stockpile of canned goods and wait things out, you need to understand that your biggest threat isn't radiation. It's your neighbors. And I don't mean that in a paranoid everyone's out to get you way. I mean it in a practical human nature is predictable under extreme stress way. The areas that do best in prolonged crisis aren't the ones with the most supplies. They're the ones with the strongest community bonds established beforehand. They're the ones where people already know and trust each other, where there's already a culture of cooperation and mutual aid. Here's what hits me about all of this. We spend so much time thinking about the physical aspects of survival, the bunkers, the supplies, the gear. But the research is clear. Your social network is your most valuable survival asset. Who do you know? Who trusts you? Who would you take a risk to help? And who would do the same for you? Those relationships built now, before anything happens, are worth more than 1,000 gas masks and water filters. Okay, so I promised you the most disturbing part of this, and here it is. I need you to brace yourself because this completely reframes everything. The lie about sheltering in place isn't just a well-meaning mistake. It's not just outdated advice that nobody got around to updating. There's evidence that it's deliberately maintained because the alternative is too threatening to discuss publicly. And the alternative is this. The authorities know that in a real World War III scenario, large-scale survival isn't possible with current infrastructure and current population densities. The carrying capacity of the land, without industrial agriculture and modern supply chains, is a fraction of the current population. We're talking maybe 10 to 15% under optimal conditions, and that's being generous. So if you actually told people the truth, that most of them are probably going to die no matter what they do, you'd have panic. You'd have social breakdown before the missiles even launched. The lie serves a function. It keeps people calm. It keeps them orderly. It keeps them waiting instead of acting. Because action on a mass scale would be destabilizing. So they give you shelter in place. They give you duck and cover. They give you emergency broadcast tests that tell you help is on the way. Not because it will save you, but because it keeps you manageable. Now here's where I want to twist this again. Because you might be feeling pretty hopeless right now, and I get that. This is heavy stuff. But hopelessness isn't the lesson here. The lesson is that your survival is your responsibility. Not the government's, not the military's, not FEMA's, yours. And once you accept that, once you really internalize it, you actually become more empowered, not less. Because here's the thing. That 10 to 15% who might make it through a worst-case scenario, that percentage isn't random. It's not just luck. The people who survive are the ones who prepared, not by hoarding, not by building a bunker and hiding, but by developing skills, building communities, creating options, understanding the real dynamics of what they're facing, learning things that most people have forgotten how to do, growing food, purifying water, building shelter, treating injuries. navigating without GPS, communicating without cell phones. These aren't doomsday prepper fantasies. They're practical skills that humans possessed for thousands of years before we outsourced everything to technology and systems. Let me tell you about a guy I read about. He was a survivalist, but not the stereotype you're thinking of. He wasn't living in a compound, stockpiling ammunition, waiting for the apocalypse. He was a suburban dad, accountant. Completely normal life. But he spent years quietly building what he called resilient relationships. He got to know his neighbors, really know them. He organized block parties. He helped people with projects. He became the guy everyone called when they needed advice or a helping hand. He also learned skills: gardening, basic medical training, ham radio operation, water filtration, not because he was paranoid, but because he saw these as practical life skills that also happened to be useful in emergencies. When COVID hit, his neighborhood was one of the most resilient in his area. People shared supplies, checked on each other, organized grocery runs for vulnerable neighbors. No one panicked, and while it wasn't World War III, it was a stress test, and his community passed. Because he had spent years, quietly, without drama, building the social infrastructure that official systems can't provide. That's what real survival looks like. Not a bunker full of beans. A network full of trust. So here's where we're at. The biggest lie about surviving World War III is that you should shelter in place and wait for help. The truth is that help probably isn't coming. And even if it does, it won't be nearly enough. The truth is that the official advice is designed to manage you, not save you. The truth is that your survival depends on factors that have almost nothing to do with radiation shielding and everything to do with community, skills, adaptability, and accepting that you are responsible for yourself. But I'm not done yet, because there's one more layer to this. And it's the layer that actually gives me hope, despite everything I've said. Here's the thing about World War III that most people don't understand. It's not inevitable. The reason we need to talk about surviving it isn't because it's definitely coming. It's because understanding the real stakes is part of what prevents it. When people believe that nuclear war is survivable in some comfortable way, they become numb to the danger. They stop demanding that their leaders take it seriously. They stop pressuring for de-escalation. They shrug off brinkmanship because, hey, we've got shelters, right? We've got plans. We'll be fine. But when you understand the truth, that a real World War III would be a civilizational catastrophe that most people wouldn't survive, suddenly the calculus changes. Suddenly you care a lot more about preventing it. Suddenly you pay attention to which leaders are escalating tensions and which ones are seeking diplomacy. Suddenly you realize that the most important survival skill might be demanding that the people in power actually work to make sure this never happens. That's the dark irony of the shelter-in-place lie. By making nuclear war seem manageable, it makes it more likely. By convincing people they'd probably be okay, it reduces the urgency to prevent it. The lie doesn't just fail to save lives in a war, it actively makes war more probable by lowering the perceived stakes. So what am I actually telling you to do? Let me break it down, but keep in mind that every situation is unique, and these are principles, not a step-by-step manual. First, reject the passive approach. Don't plan to just sit and wait, plan to adapt and act. That means having multiple options, multiple locations, multiple strategies depending on how events unfold. It means thinking through different scenarios and having a response for each one. Where would you go if you couldn't stay home? How would you get there if roads were blocked? Who would you meet up with? What skills do you have that would be valuable to a community in crisis? Second, invest in skills over stuff. Gear is great. Supplies are important, but skills can't be taken from you and they don't run out. Learn how to do things. Practical things. Take a first aid course. Learn to garden, get your ham radio license. Take a wilderness survival course. Learn basic home repair. These skills are useful in everyday life and critical in emergencies. Third, build your network now, not when things go wrong. Now, get to know your neighbors, join community groups, volunteer. Build relationships based on trust and mutual support. These connections will be worth their weight in gold if things ever get bad. And even if they don't, they'll make your life richer anyway. Fourth, stay informed but not paralyzed. Pay attention to what's happening in the world. Understand the geopolitical dynamics that could lead to conflict. But don't let fear consume you. The goal isn't to live in constant anxiety. The goal is to be aware enough to prepare and engaged enough to advocate for peace. Fifth, and this is important, take care of your mental health. This stuff is heavy. If you spend too much time dwelling on worst-case scenarios, it will wear you down. Balance awareness with action. Do something every week that makes you more prepared, and then let it go. Live your life. Hug your family. Enjoy the world that still exists. Preparation without living isn't preparation. It's just another kind of death. Now let me address something I know some of you are thinking. You're thinking, this is all great, but if the bombs are flying, nothing's going to save me anyway. Why bother? And I understand that impulse, I really do. The scale of a potential World War III is so overwhelming that it can feel pointless to even try. But here's what I'd say to that. You don't actually know what's going to happen. Yes, a worst-case scenario is catastrophic, but there's a whole spectrum of possible events between current peace and total annihilation. Limited exchanges, regional conflicts that don't go global, infrastructure attacks without nuclear components, near misses where cooler heads prevail. Every level of crisis has survivors, and at every level, the people who are prepared do better than those who aren't. Even in the most extreme scenarios, someone makes it. Why not stack the odds in your favor? Also, and this is something that doesn't get said enough, preparing for the worst helps you handle everything else. The skills and mindset you develop by taking global catastrophe seriously make you more resilient to all kinds of challenges. Job loss, natural disasters, economic downturns, personal crises. The person who has thought through genuine worst-case scenarios is the person who stays calm when things go sideways in everyday life. That calm is valuable. That perspective is valuable. Let me bring this full circle. I started this video by telling you that the biggest lie about surviving World War III is that you should shelter in place and wait for help. And I've walked you through why that advice is flawed, where it came from, and what it's really designed to do. But I want to leave you with something more than just debunking a lie. Here's the deeper truth. We live in an incredibly fragile civilization. Everything we depend on, electricity, running water, food supply, medical care, communication, transportation, all of it is interconnected in ways that make it vulnerable. A major conflict would expose those vulnerabilities brutally, but so could a solar flare, or a cyber attack, or a pandemic that's worse than what we just went through, or an economic collapse. The specific trigger matters less than the underlying reality. We have built a world that is miraculous in its complexity and terrifying in its fragility. Understanding that fragility isn't depressing, it's clarifying. It helps you see what actually matters. And spoiler alert, it's not the stuff you can buy. It's the people you love, the skills you develop, the communities you build, the connections you nurture. Those are the things that have always mattered throughout all of human history. We just forgot for a while, dazzled by technology and convenience. So when I talk about surviving World War III, I'm really talking about something bigger. I'm talking about reclaiming your agency, becoming the kind of person who doesn't just drift through life assuming someone else will handle the hard stuff. Becoming someone who thinks ahead, who builds resilience, who contributes to their community, who takes responsibility. That's what real preparation looks like. And it makes your life better right now, regardless of whether disaster ever comes. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. Let me hit you with the big takeaways one more time. The shelter in place and wait advice is not designed to save the most lives. It's designed to maintain order. In a real World War III scenario, help is probably not coming, and you need to be ready to act on your own. Your social network is your most valuable survival asset, more important than any gear or supplies. Skills are more valuable than stuff because skills can't be taken or depleted. And preparing for the worst makes you more resilient in everyday life.